You are listening to the Novel Writing Podcast, episode 96. Grab a cup, cozy up, and let's get to writing. Today's episode is about 3 things that can keep your readers from DNF'ing. DNF means did not finish, no matter how far into the book it takes readers to decide that they can't stand another page. I tend not to DNF books if I can help it, but there have been several, especially more recently as I've let go of my need to finish every book that I start, that were just not the right books for me, and I DNF'd them. There were 5 actually in the last year, and 2 of those were novels. So here's 3 things you can pay attention to in order to lower the chances of your readers DNF'ing your book. Number 1, make sure the blurb actually describes your story. Number 2, know what your readers expect for language, spice, and violence. And 3, don't let the middle sag. So let's go into each of these a little deeper. 1, make sure the blurb actually describes the story. And start the story somewhere near how the blurb describes it. I DNF'd a book this year that sucked me in with the blurb, but the story started with a prologue in third person from one character's perspective, head hopped or POV switched without warning to a second person's perspective, and then when chapter 1 actually started, it was a third character's perspective in first person POV. So all these literary sins aside, the story did not start anywhere close to where the blurb led me to believe it would. The blurb implied that the story would begin with the main character as an adult, working a job she hated, but neither the story's prologue nor first chapter introduced me to this woman as an adult in said job. I DNF'd less than 10% through the book because ultimately I couldn't get past the deep dive into backstory that really could have been feathered through the book had the book started where the blurb implied that it would. Blurbs need 3 things: a bit of the world, a bit of the character, and a lot of the plot. Those 3 things need to come together in such a way that readers can trust that the book they buy and start reading is what's being promised in the blurb. And if you aren't delivering on that promise within the first pages, it's more likely that readers will DNF. Number 2, know what your readers expect for language, spice, and violence, and don't mislead them. This is genre specific, so it behooves you to know what's the norm for your genre. If you have an urge to include something that is not typically found in your genre, or that you aren't going to actively include in your marketing that readers might not expect, then please question that urge. I'm not saying you can't include it, but make an informed decision based on getting feedback from editors and critters to know how they might react, and then decide whether to keep it or to axe it. Another question to ask is, does including this make the story better? Does it detract from the story, or does it make no difference? I would argue that the only reason to include coarse language, spice, or graphic descriptions of violence is if it serves the story and it makes sense for your genre. If it doesn't, and you're including it just because, or because it's a trend on Book Talk right now, please question it. I will admit that while I read Fourth Wing, I did have misgivings about it on 3 fronts. First, that it was in first person, which is something I personally don't enjoy reading unless it's really good and well written. Second, the author uses the F word liberally, and I don't think it made the story any better. I actually think it took away from it just because of how much swearing there was. And third, while I knew there was going to be spice in the book, I didn't expect as much spice as there was, and in the detail that she wrote it in. Those reasons are obviously my personal preference, but ultimately they didn't make me DNF because the book had such great recommendations from friends. I couldn't put it down, but I would not reread it. It's so important not to mislead your readers on those 3 things, language, spice, and violence, even if it's on accident, because many readers will DNF a book if you do include them but never warn them about it in the blurb, or on a reader discretion page at the front, or in your marketing, and some will DNF if it looked like you promised those things and you didn't deliver. And number 3, don't let the middle sag. Understanding story structure and the progression of your character arcs is key here. A saggy middle means a bored reader, and a bored reader is way more likely to DNF. I have gotten way better at eliminating the saggy middles during my first drafts, solely from what I have learned from Haley during developmental edits of my first book in particular. What works for me, and may not work for everyone, is to focus on keeping the story and the plot moving forward. This means keeping characters engaged, being proactive, taking the lead, they're solving problems, and generally being interesting people who shape the world around them rather than letting the world shape them, though that could be a character arc if you want it to be. Story structure helps because it can keep you generally on track with knowing at what percentage through the story you should be hitting the inciting incident, the different parts of the rising action, the climax, and the resolution. Most authors have an innate sense of story structure, so don't get too bogged down in the technical details. Just focus on your own internal sense of how the story is going when compared against the classic story structure chart that we all saw in high school English. But this is why feedback is important and why editors are critical. Without a second set of eyeballs on our work, we can be deluded into thinking that the first draft was perfectly executed when it really wasn't. While we all hope that readers don't DNF, if they do, they're also probably not your target audience. When we know who our readers are, it is much easier to write books that speak to them and to market them correctly. That's it for today's episode. Thanks for joining me, and remember, the first draft is supposed to be garbage. Thanks for listening to the Novel Writing Podcast. If you're ready to stop struggling and start finishing your novel, check out the 60-Day Novel Writing Challenge. It's a step-by-step program designed for solo writers to complete their first draft with clarity and focus. Visit the link in the description to learn more.